we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for coming to this today. And thank you so much to Monica for being such a present member of our community and a member of our board who put together all this content for us today. It's going to be really enlightening, maybe a little overwhelming, but that's okay.
I like to hurt people's brains though.
No warning.
I put together a lot of information. All of it's coming from just my experience working in this industry for the past, I always forget, I think it's like 14 or 15 years. I've only been assistant editing in scripted television for the last 3 years. Before that, I was editing a lot of non-union things. Most of it was documentaries. Today I want to go over kind of the assistant editor role specific to working in scripted television on big studio shows. And because not all assistant editing jobs are alike. If you're an assistant editor in independent features or even big studio features, you have different roles. Some of the stuff is the same, like managing dailies, tracking things, but there are also different responsibilities that an assistant editor will have in features that assistant editors in scripted TV are not responsible for. So I'm going to talk specifically about working in scripted television. And I'm going to be using Avid Media Composer as an NLE. You could take a lot of what I talk about and transfer it to other NLEs, but I chose Media Composer because in scripted television, 99% of the productions are in Media Composer. If you want to increase your chances for a successful career, you do need to know Avid very well. There are a couple shows out there that are in Premiere. I've heard in the past some shows have used Final Cut Pro 10, but they're very few and far between. Most of them are on Media Composer. So it's very important that that you know it really well, and that's not to say don't learn the other NLEs. It's also very handy to know the other NLEs. I've used Premiere, I've used Final Cut 7, and for the most part I use Avid because at work that's what they provide me. So today, I don't know what you guys don't know, so feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, and I will do my best to answer them. So at any point, if you have a question, go ahead and ask it, and I'll answer it for you. Today, the footage I'm using was provided to me by EditStock, courtesy of Misha Tenenbaum, who runs EditStock, and I just wanted to thank him so much for donating those resources. And Misha actually used to be a working assistant editor. He used to work on American Horror Story before he left that career path and he started up his own company with EditStock. Now, I won't be able to cover every nuance of the job, so I'm going to have some supplemental resources. I've already mentioned this in the Facebook group. Who doesn't own this book already? Buy it immediately. I don't care if it's on Kindle, Nook, or you go down to Barnes & Noble, buy it. If you are serious about pursuing a career and really trying to make it, you need this book. It's written by Lori Jane Coleman and Diana Friedberg, both editors. Lori is my inspiration for all the giving back I do to the community and teaching and mentoring that I do. She was the first person who allowed me to shadow in her cutting room, and I shadowed her assistant, and that was several years ago. And she also used to run the ACE intern program, and she hired a lot of green editors to help people break into scripted, and she trained them really well. If you worked for Lori, you were ready to handle anything, and she is the one who inspired me to give back. So she wrote this book, and it's a very valuable resource. Read it. It goes into excruciating detail about the job and everything you may need to know to help prepare for that first opportunity that comes your way. And here are some additional tools that assistant editors use that I'm not going to be covering. ScriptSync's a big one. There's tutorials online to learn how to use ScriptSync. FileMaker Pro people use for database work. After Effects and Photoshop you could use for Temp VFX. I use something called the Runtime app. It's an app on my iPhone, and I just punch in my act timings. It'll add it all up for me, and I tell it what my total runtime should be, and it'll tell me how much over or under I am, so it's a really easy way to calculate my runtime of my episodes and keep a record of it. And I usually will just take a screenshot and like text it to my editor, and so he sees the entire breakdown of which acts are long or short. So it's a really useful app. It's not that expensive. And then another, has anyone heard of Evan Schiff?
I know it.
Evan's he's the nicest guy you'll meet, and he's also brilliant. He's currently working on John Wick 3 in New York right now. But on when he has time off for fun, he codes and programs and creates these really great tools for assistant editors. And so if you go to his website, he has all these free tools that you can use, like I think it's the EDL, the subcap converter, and other resources that he has. And he does that for fun. He is an uber nerd and the nicest guy you will ever meet, and also a fantastic editor. So it came to my attention when we put this out that when the online version comes out, several people overseas actually want to watch the online version, and they actually use different names for certain things. So this is just for them. So if I'm talking about dailies, they know I mean rushes. Cutting room is edit suite. We call edit log, continuity report. We kind of use both of those. They don't really use facing pages in some areas. And what the facing pages are in the line script, if you have your script on this side, you're going to have a facing page with your script supervising notes facing that page on this side, so the editor can easily look back and forth and refer to the notes from the set, the script supervisor, so they could, as they're cutting, they could refer to that, because there might be director notes in there, there might be things like, oh, there was no sound roll, just stuff like that. They call slate an ID board. A tail slate could be known as an end board. A circle take is also known as printed take. Timecode burn is also called BITC and TCIV. I forgot what those stand for. I think TCIV is timecode and vision, is what one of my British friends told me. Generic footage, such as establishing shots of just like maybe an overview of the city or something, or B-roll, can be called GVs. And what we call sound backgrounds, just like they'll call Atmos. That's just like, birds singing in the background, park ambience. What we might call room tone, they'll refer to as wild track. Their wild track refers to anything that was shot on set. More often than not, the way I use wild track is that's actually off-camera dialogue recorded by production, and they will label it with a WT, and then that's something that needs to be integrated into the cut. I've heard they don't use the term turnovers. Turnovers occur after the end of the edit. It's basically when we're locked. That is the process of getting everything together, making your AAFs, EDLs, your outputs, and sending the references to your composer, to your sound team, to the online facility, so they could get the picture online, and also could include visual effects turnovers. We just call them turnovers here. Lower thirds have been known as astons, captions, and name straps. I have never heard name straps, so that was a new one on me. Finishing and color can be known as online and grading, and an assistant editor is not the same thing as an edit assistant. They are different job roles and different pay rates. So those are two different things. They are not interchangeable. Okay, so I've worked on a lot of different types of projects, a lot of pop culture stuff, and I'm a huge nerd, so I'm okay with that. Mostly documentaries. I've worked on talk shows, did short form packages. Baggage was like the #1 game show on the Game Show Network for a while with Jerry Springer. One thing I want to point out, it's important to understand that you know more than you realize with your experience, and you don't know what you don't know until you start the job working as an assistant editor. When I was working at E, I don't know how many of you are familiar with E shows, but they like a lot of sapphire and Boris effects and glamorous things, manipulation of the footage, and we did those all in Avid Media Composer, and I didn't think any of that would transfer over. All that effect work I did when I got into scripted television, and I was completely wrong. It actually made me very valuable as an assistant, because I have no problem tackling any kind of temp visual effects, because I already had all those effect skills. I just don't use as many, sapphire sparkles effects, sapphire lens flares. I don't use those anymore. I might use other things. And all the sizzles and show opens and short packages and montages that I cut has transferred over into cutting recaps, because they're essentially little promos of the episode. And so I could cut recaps fairly quickly. That was never an issue for me getting into scripted, because I had already done it for a long time. And in addition to offline editing, I was also an online editor for years. I color graded, I mastered, and I delivered over 200 episodes of various television shows, which means all of my technical skills remained intact. Now, for people who are editors and who are thinking about taking the step back into assisting, that is something that is vital. A lot of editors will lose their technical skills over the years because they just need to focus on editing. I didn't lose those skills, so I was able to, the editor gave me a chance, was willing to give me that chance because he knew my technical skills were fine. I knew how to do outputs. I knew how to do EDLs. I could read spec sheets. And so that is a skill that you will need. Those are skills you will need and to brush up on if you've been editing for a while and haven't kept up your technical skills, because that is a vital part of the job. Because I was editing for so long, that transfers over into I can read a room. I've worked with producers. I've worked with directors. I've worked with VPs in the room. And so that transfers over when, you know, you're an editor and scripted, you're working with the directors, you're working with the producers, and the studio execs still come in. You're mostly working with the producers, who are usually also the writers. And so those soft skills, the politics, that comes with time and experience. And for me, that helped transfer over because I had already had experience dealing with that kind of collaboration. So that's something that you will need to work on, is, you know, the politics, the soft skills, and that's something you can't rush. It just comes with experience. And so this is what I've worked on recently. I've worked on a lot of visual effects shows. That wasn't intentional, but I'm not really complaining. I started with a very challenging visual effects show, Minority Report, and it's helped make me more hireable, because there are shows out there that maybe one of the comedies or just like straight drama, they don't really require a lot of visual effects. And if you want to make yourself more hireable, like if, say, you just worked on a straight drama, you might not be considered for something like Altered Carbon, because they're not sure you can handle the extra challenge of working with visual effects and dealing with the visual effects department and just being able to deal with like big action scenes. So it's worked to my advantage that I started on a very challenging action and effects heavy show, because it makes me very hireable. So just depending on what you go into, keep that in mind as well, that you might have to deal with that sort of pigeonholing. And it's kind of silly because you have to start somewhere to get that experience. So someone has to be willing to take that chance on you. But it'll help you out if you have that experience. With my experience on these shows, it makes it very easy to hire me on a straight drama, because I'm honestly probably gonna get my work done early, because I'm used to having to prioritize and make time for these big action scenes that I have to sound design, or these scenes I have to do temp visual effects for. So that kind of stuff just feels like it'd be really easy for me because of what I've worked on. So keep that in mind as well, the type of shows you're trying to go for, and if you're hitting walls and facing challenges, just what people are seeing. So, you know, I'm gonna go over visual effects today. I'm gonna do some basic builds, and basically the builds I'm gonna show you will cover the techniques of pretty much most of what you will need to know, and then it would be a matter of just kind of layering techniques on top of each other for more complex effects. All right, here's a cutting room. Typically, a lot of the shows will have standing desks, thank God. And assistant editors don't usually get a big client monitor. And you're gonna be in that room a long, long time. They typically run on the union shows, it's either 45-hour minimums or 50-hour minimums, and a lot of times they are willing to pay for overtime, so sometimes you'll have really long hours. I think the longest shift I worked was 16 hours before they made me go home because of union turnaround time, and I had to be in early the next morning. So, you know, you need to have tools there to help you stay healthy, keep moving. If you can't stay healthy, you're not gonna be able to do your job as well, and it's gonna affect your quality of work. So it's very important to find what works for you. And I also have, you ask any person who's worked for a while, we all have tendonitis in our goddamn wrists. And it sucks. A lot of people will use, they'll have wrist guards, or they have a Wacom tablet, or a vertical mouse, or they have, like, I know a lot of people like the rollerball mouses. I use the roller mouse red. Not a lot of people use this, but it's worked for me and helped abate my tendonitis pain in my wrists. So find what works for you, because it's your body and you only get one of them. It's really important. As far as organizing, I always ask for a whiteboard and a bulletin board. I like having a whiteboard there because if anyone ever comes in asking me for something, I don't care how good your memory is, you're gonna forget something. You need to always write it down. So if you have a notebook for that, I like the whiteboard because it's like staring at me. I could do little check marks for the day. If someone comes in wanting me to do something, they could look straight at my whiteboard and they could decide whether or not they want to continue the conversation. Or if they're like, you know what, I'll come back later, or they'll be like, I really need you to do this first. This is higher on your priority list. So I'm like, all right. I'll also, like, regular things I might put up there, things I need to know, like the TRT we're trying to hit, or audio configurations. On my bulletin board, I tend to put spec sheets. They're usually, a lot of times they're emailed to us. I like printing them all out, because every time I have to do a turnover, I pull the spec sheets down and plop it in front of myself. I don't trust my memory. I have too much going on, and I will look at the list and make sure I'm doing everything right. One thing I do for myself, and a lot of people tell me it's a waste of time because they'll type up their spec sheet and just reprint it out every time. I actually like writing. Every time I'll write down a new, fresh list of what I need to do for the turnovers, because it helps me remember it better. That's me. I like to be a little analog sometimes, but do what works for you. And sometimes shows that have been established will already have little show Bibles for post. And so they might have already created a checklist for you for the turnovers of everything you need to do. I also include like contact sheets on there. I'll have a clipboard with call sheets, because call sheets are very important to have. Your editor may come in and ask what did they shoot yesterday, or what are they going to shoot? And you're just like, here's the call sheets, here you go, take the clipboard, and they'll look through that. The call sheets also have a lot of handy information about the scenes being shot, whether they're gonna only shoot part of the scene, or they're gonna shoot the full scene. Sometimes I've referred to call sheets because in the final paperwork phase, I'll need to look up an actor's name, and it won't be one of our main actors, so I don't know the person's name, but if I know what daily it came from, I could look back to the shoot date and then go to my call sheet from that date, and it'll list all of the actors, including the stunt people. And so that's like a really easy way to find the name. There's all sorts of information on the call sheets. So this is all ways that I like to do it. Some people keep everything electronically. I don't always, I like having this printed out, because what if the power goes out or my computer fries or something happens? I've now lost access to all of that information. So the critical stuff that I know I will always need, I'll just print out and keep it on my board for the whole season. Is there any questions? No one?
Yeah.
Yes.
When do you throw all that paperwork away?
End of the show. And they usually have a secured shredding box. Sometimes it's like a locked bin and you just put it in there. Sometimes it's literally just like a banker's box that the PA has under their desk, and then they will shred it themselves and get rid of it. Because everything is, we'll throw scripts in there. Our paperwork has descriptions of scenes. Like, we can't let that go out into a regular trash bin. It has to be shredded. So anything that is show related will go into the show shredding box, and then I let the production team take care of it. Any other questions? Yeah?
No, but end of the show, you're talking like when the show's finished, or like the end of the season?
When I wrap.
Okay.
Which is not always necessarily once the show's finished, because we work in, typically, most shows, we'll work in editorial teams. There's usually 3. And so we have a start dates that start like every week or 2 weeks, depending on when our show starts shooting. And that means we'll also like wrap at different times. So once I'm done, I just dump all my I take great joy in dumping my big script binders on the PA's desk and be like, it's your problem now. and I'll take all the paperwork that I've been using for references and I'll just put it in the shredding box for them to shred. This is my calendar. This is a union calendar. I like it because it's free and it conveniently fits Post-it notes. Some people will do calendars on their computer. I hate having to carry on my computer all the time, and then I also have like personal stuff on there. So I have this in my office, and I'll put Post-its for like, all the yellow is shoot days, and this is obviously a crazy shoot day because I got yellow, and then a week and a half later, I have orange. Those are both shoot days. They were cross-boarding. They were shooting multiple episodes at once, and so we just got hit with dailies really bad on this one. Normally you'll have more time in between dailies. But those will be all the shoot days, and if sometimes schedules change, I'll be able to easily add a Post-it note or move a Post-it note. I also have when cuts are due, like the editor's cut, director's cut, and it's really nice because me and my editor can just like stand there in front of my calendar and just sort of gauge and prioritize and see what we need to do to make it through the episode. So that's why I really like using it. Not everyone does. All right, so here's our episode stages. We have dailies. Typically it's 8 to 10 days. On Altered Carbon, which was a show I did for Netflix, I was on the finale and we cross-boarded. And so I worked on episodes 9 and 10. So cross-boarding is when they are shooting multiple episodes kind of at the same time, because we have maybe a certain actor for a certain amount of time, so they'll shoot all that actor scenes across episodes, or maybe a certain location, so they'll shoot all the scenes in that location. So it's for scheduling and budget. So on that, I have for 2 episodes, I had 38 days of dailies coming in at various times, and I really had to rely on the call sheet to understand what was coming in the next day. But typically, it's 8 to 10 days. 10 days is usually for like a finale or a big action show. After your last day of dailies, you'll get the editors. You'll get about 2 to 3 days to do the editor's cut. That's for the editor to get everything cut, for you to get all the sound design, temp sound design work done, get the music cut in, and get it. I don't always have all the visual effects in yet because that takes a lot of time. And this is to get ready for the director's cut. And so I usually do it during director's cut because the directors typically make a lot of changes. And it's a waste of time if you're spending all this time doing all this temp visual effects work and they're just like, nah, I don't like that take. And it took you all day to get that temp done. It's a waste of time. So you just wait, and then during the director's cut, I'll get all those done. Per DGA contracts, the directors get 4 days. That can't change. If they want to try to change that, they have the production has to deal with the DGA. So the directors get 4 days. And sometimes they come in, or sometimes they'll work remotely, or there are email notes. And then after that is the producer's cut. In television, the writers rule. So your producers are also your writers, typically. Depending on the show and the schedules, they might get 4 days, they might get 2 weeks, they might get 3 weeks. It just all depends. And then it's gonna go to the studio. Sometimes they combine the studio network cut, but usually it'll go to the studio first, and then it'll go to the network. Like for example, on Altered Carbon, our studio was Skydance, so they got a cut first. They got their turn giving notes, and then our network was Netflix, and so then Netflix got the next round, the next version of the episode, and that could range depending on the schedules and what the studios want. So it could range for only like 3 days or 2 weeks, just depending on the state of the episode. And after that, supposedly you're locked if they're being nice to you. And then that's when you would start all of your turnovers to online, mix, and music. And mix, that's the sound department. You just refer to it as mix. And your visual effects turnovers can occur throughout the process. And this is why. The visual effects artist, depending on the complexity of the shot, might need that shot sooner. Because if we need to deliver by a certain date for air, and it's a really complicated shot, they may need the shot as soon as possible because that's how long it's going to take to get the shot done. So sometimes if it's a scene with a lot of visual effects, we might lock that in editor's cut. So we'll just send that scene out to the director early, be like, you need to go through this because we have to get it to visual effects. And then it'll go through the producers, that little section, then it'll go through studio, and they'll be like, okay, this part of the episode is locked. They could start visual effects on it. And so that's why visual effects turnovers can occur throughout the process, because you can't always wait until you're locked, because you're giving your visual effects artist 2 or 3 weeks to do a bunch of shots, and sometimes it's just not physically possible. There's not enough hours in the day. There's not enough money in the budget to pay for all the overages and overtime of the visual effects artist. So that's why it just varies depending. Yeah, Isabel?
What are some of the turnover, or some of the VFX that you do that maybe you don't turn over? Like, are there any things like split screens where you're like, oh, it looks so good that we don't even really need to send this out? Or do you
Everything
guys-
gets sent out.
Everything, okay.
As the assistant editor, it's not up to you to determine where it's gonna go. You mark it, you number it, and then the producer, it's usually the co-producer or post-supervisor, kind of depending on the relationship where the responsibility lies. They might say, you know what, we can save money, that could be done in online. It's a simple effect. Or they might be like, no, we're sending that out to a vendor. So it's not up to you to determine where it's gonna go. If it has some kind of manipulation on it, even if it's a simple pimple cleanup, that is marked, and they decide who gets to work on it, not you. You just let them know that it exists. If it's beyond like the daily of what was shot, then it needs to be marked, and it's up to them. Because if a shot slips through and they find out later, guess who's gonna get in trouble? So you mark everything, and then they'll omit stuff. Yep.
How common is fibering still in terms of producers and studio network cuts?
Is what?
Fibering, like when you online a cut to a client and you do live changes, like for AT&T?
I don't deal with that.
Okay.
That's something that the co-producer has to set up with whoever they have managing the media, depending on what stage it is
Okay.
in. We do work remote on Colony. We did work remotely for sound. Our sound department was up in Canada, and so the associate producer had to set it up at the facility we were editing at to make sure they could play back live from their timeline, and we could hear it, so the producers could get notes here in LA because the producers weren't in Canada.
Okay.
So that's something that's like far beyond the assistant editor. Because that's expensive, and it has to be coordinated and set up. So that's going to go to your post producer, or the associate producer, to figure out, because they got to approve those budgets. Next, once you're done with turnovers, you're going to get online's going to go back all to the original media, bring it online, and they're going to send you something called a VAM, which I forgot what that stands for. Do you remember?
Video
Video assembled master.
There you go. Video assembled master. And you just have to check to make sure it's correct. Make sure all the resizes are there, because resizes are usually done in online. Any time manipulation with time warps or speed changes, those are correct. So just make sure all of that matches up, and you just literally overlay it on your sequence. Some people like doing a superimpose. I use the diagonal crop, and then I'll just watch it. I'll eat my lunch and watch it to make sure everything lines up. And if something doesn't line up, then you send an email to your post producer, associate producer, or whoever's in charge of depending on the show, you might be emailing someone different. You just let them know, hey, this is not correct at this time code, blah blah blah, and you give them the best description you could give them, and they'll fix it, and then they'll send you back another VAM to check it. And then when everything is said and done, I've seen it called color corrected master, CCMs, edited master, EM, CTM, color time master. Depending on the show, they'll call it something different. That's basically your final lock show. And they'll give you split tracks of music, sound effects, dialogue, all mixed. So that's the final show. And you're responsible for bringing that. They'll usually give it to you as MXF files, and with a bin. You could just bring it into the show, because then they like us using those as much as possible for recaps. Because then they don't have to redo work. And so we'll just use those if we can. Alright, editorial creative workflow. If you're not familiar with what a scripted timeline looks like, that's a full episode with only dailies and production audio. That's Temp VFX. That's all my sound. That's music. So that's last bit. That's the VAM on top. You'll see that has the crop on it. And all those other things that popped up. Those are what we get back from the visual effects vendors. They'll send back their shots, and then the producers will look at them to see if they like them, if they have any notes, make sure everything's all good. It has happened in the past where, for whatever reason, they like make a shot too short or the timing's off. And so then we have to go back to like, hey, we're missing like 5 frames off the end of this shot. Did you just forget to send it to me, or is it not done? And then that's their mistake if our turnovers were correct. So then they have to go fix that and deal with that. Okay, so prep. Prep. They usually give you a prep day. On Altered Carbon, they gave me a prep week. There's good reason for it. And this is where you're gonna get everything ready. So, a one-liner. On your first day, ask for the one-liner for your episode. That is the schedule, the shooting schedule for your episode. You need to know when you're gonna get the scenes. And it'll have like a description of the scene, how many pages it is, when they're shooting it. Sometimes they don't have certain scenes scheduled yet, and so they'll put that at the end to be scheduled, and that's very good to know. When I see that, I tell my editor, oh, by the way, they haven't figured out when they're going to shoot our big action scene finale yet, and they'll be like, great. So that's all good stuff to know, and let your editor, like, flag anything that your editor should know that might affect his meeting his cut deadlines. A call sheet, I talked about call sheets. You need to know what they're going to shoot the next day. Call sheets can be changed the night before, so make sure you have the most recent call sheet. And one-liners could be changed daily as well, so make sure you always have the latest one-liner. Always read the script first. I highly recommend knowing what your episode is about before you start doing dailies, so you could catch any weird things or changes. Sometimes a scene's written one way, and then they shoot something different, and you're like, wait, this isn't right, and this is different, okay. And so then I'm gonna flag that for my editor and be like, by the way, they just completely changed the scene, just so you know. And they're usually like, great, okay. So read your script. I also read all the script. If there's an episode, I read everyone else's scripts as well, because I need to know the through line of the entire story. You need to make your script binders. And they're big binders where you need to make one for your editor, make one for yourself, and you're gonna have your script in there. And then when line script pages come in, you're gonna replace pages, throw the other ones out into a secure shredding box. You're gonna put the facing pages in. All the editors I've worked with have liked having the edit log in the back usually, just in case they need to refer to it for anything. I will break up the acts with dividers, and I'll put act 1, and I'll put what scenes are in that act, so you can easily navigate. Now on Altered Carbon, we didn't have acts, there's no commercials. So what I did is, I still did that, but I found a clean break in a scene that would end on one page and a new scene would start on the next page, and I would just be like, scenes 1 through 10 are in this section, scenes 11 through 25 are in this section. And so I still did it when there were no commercial breaks, because it makes it much easier to navigate the script. When you're there, ask for all the spec sheets if they're available. Even if they're not available, ask. And then if they haven't gotten them to you, by the next day or the day after, kindly ask, hey, are these available yet? And they might set a meeting with your vendors that you might have to be a part of, just so they could go over their spec sheets. Just depends. I like to do my continuity on my prep day, and I find that not many people actually do this. I do it because it forces me to read the script. To make a continuity, what it is, who doesn't know what a continuity is? A lot of people don't. Okay, so the continuity is just, it's a list of your scenes in the order they appear in your episodes. So they're moving scenes around. You will move around the scene numbers. And it has whether it's day or night, interior, exterior, scene number, a description of the scene, and it's like the runtime of the scene. And some continuities might want to know what music are in there or visual effects. Every show is has slightly different templates for continuities, but it's generally just your show in paper format, really easy to refer to. So I like to do it on my prep day because they take hours to type up. Some people will go faster by like pulling the descriptions off the call sheets, which you could do, or the one-liners, because they always have descriptions for scenes. I personally don't like doing that because I don't always think they're accurate descriptions, and sometimes they aren't accurate, and sometimes it's focusing on the wrong part of the scene, so it's not really helping when you're trying to figure out where can I move a scene around. So I'll read the script, and every scene I'll just type out my own description, like 1 to 2 sentence description, and it makes me really familiar with it. It usually takes me about 3 or 4 hours to do this. It takes a long time to make continuities. I'll print out my continuity, put it up on my wall, and as scenes come in, I'll like check them off. If a partial came in, I'll make a note, it's incomplete. And so it's a good way for me to check what's going on. So when my editor asks me, what scenes are we still missing? What are we getting? What's been pushed? Because I'll write like, sometimes scenes get pushed because they just ran out of time on the day to shoot them. Then I'll make a note, and it's all on that continuity, and that's my personal way of tracking it. Kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone, and it allows me not to stress about when we're rushing to get the editor's cut out. I already made the continuity. All I have to do is fill in the act timings and like change the date and put editor's cut on it, and it's done. A lot of people will wait till the editor's cut is due, so they're like trying to get their stuff done, trying to get the cut right, then they're trying to type up the continuity really fast, and I just like not have to stress about it. That's my preference. And it also makes me very familiar with the episode because I've already had to type up descriptions for every single scene in the episode. So I know what's going on in the episode. There's also a lot of technical things you gotta do. You gotta, what?
Good question.
Huh?
What program do you use for your continuity?
What?
Do you use FileMaker for continuity or?
Oh, hell no.
What do you do then?
They always provide me with Excel templates.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just type it up in Excel.
Thanks.
Yes, Kylie?
Can you describe more what the facing pages are and where this comes from and how it's different from the editor's block?
Oh, I will. I have a paperwork section.
Never mind.
Ha! I got stuff prepared. So as far as settings go, import your user settings. Your editor might want you to import their user settings, or may they prefer to do it themselves. And sometimes they always tell you, always create new user settings. I have not met one editor who's willing to create new user settings. So here's my cheat. So I'm not really lying when I'm saying, yeah, I created new user settings. You create a new user setting. You open up the old user settings in Avid, and then it'll bring up all the settings, and then you copy like the keyboard and the bin views and everything into the new user settings. It's like, I did create new user settings. And then I just copied all of their actual settings into the new file. And it has to do with things getting corrupt. That's my cheat, and I'm sticking with it. You need to check your software. On my last show, I opened up Avid for the first time, and it had this like, you have no license for this. I was like, well, that's a problem. It's a good thing we don't actually have dailies today. So I had to go get the tech guy who was installing all the systems. I'd be like, I can't open Avid. It says I have no license. He's like, oh, really? That's weird. I was working this morning. I was like, well, not now. And so he had to fix that for me. That was fun. Check your plugins. Like a lot of times they might provide Boris or Sapphire. And a lot of times they might forget to actually enter the license key in. Check to make sure the plugins are working and will render.
Excuse me.
Yeah?
It's like, what version of Avid do you usually use currently right now? Is it,
On
you guys
shows?
8, or are you like in 2018 stuff?
Oh,
Or are you
Well-
7? Or?
I don't get to choose that.
Yeah.
I show up and they're like, this is the version you're using. And I'm like, great.
What, I mean, what version have you been using?
8.
Mostly
We've been using various versions of 8. So the next thing you also need to get familiar with the media drives. If someone started before you, They will most likely have created your stock drive on the Nexus, or some shows still use the Unity, which is really old. And stocks drive, an elements drive, music drive, sound effects drive. Just check to make sure you know where everything is that you might need. You need to create an episode drive. So if you're working on episode 202, make sure you have, it's usually like the acronym of the show. Then you put 202, and then you just underscore media. And that's where all your dailies will go to, your dailies media. You need to create a project for your episode, and don't decide to get all like individual and like mess up the pattern if someone came in before you. Follow their naming nomenclature, so it'll all line up nicely. And then you also will need to create a render drive for yourself and a render drive for your editor, and make sure you have access turned on. I like to be mean, and I turn off everyone else's access for our render drives, because guess what happens when I allow everyone to have access to my render drive and be able to write media to it? There's all sorts of stuff that end up on our render drives. It's like, and that's just from people being lazy and not checking their drive settings. So I will lock everyone out. So the only one who is allowed access to my render drive is me. And everyone can read them, but they can't write to them. And then for my editor, only my editor and myself, like anything my editor has access to, I give myself access to, because if I need to do something on it, I need to have access. And that way, that's their drive. No one else is going to write to it or accidentally write to it, because it will happen. And you also have to do a tech check, microphone, mixer, speakers are working. I've started where I had, the speaker was blown out, and I was like, well, I can't listen to a staticky speaker all the time. And so they would literally have to switch out equipment, make sure your monitors are working, just everything is working. And that's all your first day. Who said yep?
Yay!
Oh. So, dailies. The biggest part, one of the biggest parts of an assistant's job. So I wanted to show this. Not everyone does it this way. I like to do it this way. This is my Avid MXF folder. Who didn't listen to my advice on Facebook and made sure they were familiar with Avid Media Composer? Who's a little fuzzy? Who doesn't know what they're looking at right now? Everyone knows. So I don't have to explain what these folders are.
Tell me again, just
You-
in case
you-
I forgot.
Alright, I know you've been on Premiere for a little while,
Not
Megan.
doing the homework.
Alright, so this is how
I'm dumb, so.
Avid stores media. There's an Avid Media Files folder on your drive that Avid generates. They create an MXF folder. And then what you get from the dailies facility is most times they've given me MXF files, and they've already created databases for me, and they've named the folders nicely. Thanks, Kylie. Kylie was our daily supervisor on Colony for season 2. Kylie was the best. She was amazing.
Time in my life. You were great.
And so it's named nicely. It's Colony. It's the date that they came in. I think that refers to, I think it's a shoot date. Episode, and then the 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the shoot day. So this was really important when I was on Altered Carbon, and I had 38 of these folders. Our dailies were all over the place. I needed this information in case I needed to refer to the original media. You'll see there's 2 05s and then a 05 CO86. Something happened with the dailies, and so I had them resend me one camera, and so that was the resend of the new media. And so I know there, because I still had other dailies that were fine, so I have both folders in there. And the way you can do this is Avid will, if you need to recreate your own databases, you drag the MXF media in there. You have to create a folder name that is specific to your drive, so it might be like edit 01 or something is what Avid will call it. You need to know the name of your system and what the Nexus recognizes it as. You throw it in there, you let it generate the databases in Avid, and then you can just change the folder name. And that way, the only thing in that folder is the dailies from that date. There won't get anything else you import, won't get confused in there. So if for whatever reason you need to copy over a folder from a certain day, It's right there for you. It's all set up, and it makes it very clear. And I have had to, this has benefited me. I can't remember a specific instance, but this is very, very valuable. Some people don't do this. I highly recommend it for your own sanity. Organization is vital, because you never know when it's gonna bite you in the ass for being messy. Okay, so dailies. First thing you do, you're gonna import media into your folders. They'll provide bins for you. You open up the bins, and you're gonna get this master clips bin with all the dailies for this day, or for a day. And the first thing you need to do is make sure it's all online. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's because they forgot to give you certain media, and sometimes it's because there's something corrupted, or for whatever reason, the media didn't get copied over. There's all sorts of reasons. So just make sure it's all actually online, and that you can hear the audio, and everything's good. You're gonna need to check it against the paperwork. Now, I have a very specific way I like doing this, because I don't like looking at a bin of 60 clips. It hurts my eyeballs. As you can see, I wear glasses. I'm already losing my sight. What I'll do is I like using this sort bin that I create. It's a daily sort bin, and then I'll have one for BNAG. And BNAG is basically all the non-circle takes. I'll include all of it. And I'll do an option, copy into those sort bins, and then I close the bin I got from the dailies facility forever. And I only ever open that bin if there's a problem. Like, I want a record of what the dailies facility gave me. Because what if I accidentally delete a clip in my sort bin, which I have done. Then I go back to the bin. I was like, oh, that was my bad. And I just bring the clip back. It wasn't the dailies facility mistake. It was mine. And I'm able to just copy the clip back over and keep working. So I'll separate into the sort bin. And your editors will usually always want you to label your circle takes in some way, whether it's with an asterisk or a little bullet. They all have their own ways they like. And I'll just go through assembly line style, and I'll just like do a little asterisk, do a little copy of that section. I'll just click on every naming file, because you have to do it like 60 for 100 clips, and just say Command C or Command V, and just like paste it at the end of all the file names. So it's all said and done. And then I'll create scene bins for all the individual scenes, and I'll copy those, or I'll drag them, not copy them, out of my sort folder. I'll combine it with the BNAG files, which are not marked as circle takes. And then from there, I'm dealing with much less clips, much smaller chance of me making a mistake because I overlooked something. Because now I'm not dealing with 100 clips I'm trying to compare. It's just 10. And I'll go through every scene, and I'll compare it against the script supervisor reports. She'll provide you with an edit log, which is a summary of everything that they shot for that day, with any notes, what the circle takes are, director's preferences. And if they're like, oh, she had a really great smile in this take, or whatever, everything you need is gonna be in that edit log. They're gonna have something that's a cover page, and that'll go over like everything they shot, if stuff was omitted, if stuff just wasn't shot completely. Now, if something's omitted, that means they're not gonna shoot it. You need to let your editor know that, because what if they're looking for that shot? And they'll usually have any other miscellaneous notes that you might need to know, like, we shot a wild track for this. The wild tracks are sometimes hidden in your sound rolls, so you're gonna have to look in your sound rolls, which dailies also gives you, and you might have to import them. Sometimes they're imported for you, sometimes they're not, but they're usually marked with a WT for wild track, and you have to import those in and include them with any scenes that the wild track is for. And so you gotta look for all of that stuff on the scripts pages. Now, the script supervisor will also give you facing pages and a line script. So a line script is just a script page, and they're gonna mark, like, setup 1A goes to this point with an arrow, and then 1B goes down here, and that's your script page. And then facing on the other side, you'll have the hole punch on the opposite sides will be the facing page, and it'll be all the notes. It's the exact same information from the edit log, but it's in a facing page format to face the line script, and that's for your editor to use and refer to while they're cutting. And that's what a facing page is. Is it clear? I don't have a binder because that they're all watermarked and secret. Everyone clear what the facing page is? So you use all this to check. Now, when something goes wrong, you're also gonna get camera reports, sound reports, and daily use facility reports. When something goes wrong and something is missing, or a take is cut short, that's when I usually start, if there's not a note about it in my script supervisor reports, I'm gonna start looking at the camera reports to see, hey, did camera mark this as there's something wrong here? And what about sound? I'm missing sound here. What does the sound report say about this take? And then also, I check the daily use facility report as well, because it's like, did the facility even receive these files? Or this is something they received and it got lost in the shuffle somehow. All those scenarios has happened. And sometimes, you know, human beings write these reports. Sometimes the camera report's not right, or the sound reports are inaccurate. Actually, I found the camera reports more inaccurate more often. I don't think I've ever had an inaccurate sound report, but I've had camera reports have incorrect information on them. And so I have to compare that with the script supervisor's report, and then the daily use facility report to see what, and I look at all of that. Because if something's missing and I can't figure it out, or something's cut short, that's when I have to email people. And you don't email one person. It's gonna be a big list that includes your co-producer and post-producer. And if something's wrong, that means someone might have made a mistake along the way, and you don't want it to be your mistake, because you could possibly get someone in trouble by raising this flag. So you have to be very careful to check all the reports, see what information you have, and if you can't figure it out, when you're asking where it is, be like, because the first thing they're gonna ask you is, did you check the reports? You'll be like, you know, it says this on the camera report, but that doesn't match what it says on the daily use facility report. And then also the script report says this, which is conflicting with this report. Could someone look into this? Don't ever blame anyone. You don't know what happened. All you gotta ask them is, can someone look into this to make sure that this doesn't actually exist, or something happened here. Sometimes I've had scenes cut off because the camera actually malfunctioned and they forgot to mark it on the report. So sometimes they have to go all the way back to production. If it happens in an order. Daily use facility double checks. Then if it's good on their end, they go all the way back to production, who, by the way, they're in the middle of shooting still. So now you're kind of interrupting their break time to try to figure this out. So you have to be very careful, make sure you're very respectful in your emails when you're contacting people. And, you know, don't point blame. You just like, can you look into this? This is what the information I have, and I can't seem to find it or figure out what's going on here. And I've never had any kickback with that approach. And I have seen people like point the finger and blame, and it's not a pretty situation when that happens, because people can get in really big trouble. So you just gotta make sure you're really respectful, cover your ass, check your reports, let them know the information you have, so they know that you did check, you're not incompetent, and then it's up to them to kind of figure it out for you. Sometimes the daily use facility just needed to like re-encode something happened on their end on transfer. Sometimes the media that got to the daily use facility was corrupted, so, and for some reason it fell through the cracks, so now we're having the mixer resend files, or the camera department resend files. So you never know how far it will go. And if you're nice about it, no one will hit you for bringing it up, because it needs to get fixed. And so all these reports I'm talking about, I posted in the Facebook group. This is a free webinar on the Moviola website, The Modern Job of the Assistant Editor. Misha Tannenbaum did a while ago, and he actually has examples of all of these reports, and he points out all of these things I'm talking about. So I don't want to be redundant, and paperwork's not the most exciting thing, but if you watch this, you're gonna see actual examples of all of these different types of paperwork and what they look like, what to look out for. And this is free on the Moviola website. Okay, and as far as dailies go, let's see. That's just checking dailies. That's your morning. When you organize the bin, you're gonna prep them to the editor's preferences. And every editor is different, and they might be very, very different. So on your first day of work, or when you're gonna have a conversation with the editor if you've never worked with them before. Hey, how do you like your daily bins prepped? And they'll tell you. I worked with an editor who didn't like groups, so I didn't group anything, and I had to like stack all the A, B, and C cameras. And on each individual clip, actually mark the starts and resets and everything. So I had to do triple the work or double the work. Most editors actually like the groups, and so they'll be like, oh yeah, group it. And then sometimes the editors want the individual cameras in their bin visible, and sometimes they don't. They want a smaller bin. I've worked with an editor, he likes having the camera stacks because he could use them to see what the coverage is, because I'll set poster frames for everyone to make it kind of like look like a film reel. So there are like 3 takes. I might take like a poster frame from the beginning of the take, and then the camera moves. For the second take, I'll put like where it is in the middle of the coverage, and then in the third one, I'll put like where the scene ends. And it might be 3 different shots, and that way he's able to get an idea of like what the coverage is in that scene. But some people don't want that. They just want the groups. And so it just all depends, but just make sure sync is correct. When I do that, I don't mark all the craziness in the A, B, and C cams individually. I'll just mark like start like with a marker usually, and like a red marker it's usually, but every editor is different. And then I'll do, for any time they restart the scene within the same take, sometimes I'll actually subclip that out, and so that'll be like 1A-1.1, 1A-1.2, so they realize there's actually 2 takes in that one take because they restarted without cutting camera. And there's also just resets, which are usually marked with a different color, where the actor just messed up or the director just wants them to kind of restart from a different point of the scene, and then you'll mark those so they realize, oh, okay, they restarted here. That's usually where you find your bloopers as well with the actors when they can't remember their lines. And so every editor's different. It's, all the editors I've worked with like working in frame view, and make sure that you know how they want their clips named. Usually the dailies facility will put too much information, and I'll just simplify it. I've had one editor with the groups, they like the .grp, so they know it's the group. I've had another editor say, don't put .grp, that's no point. He's like, just tell me what cameras are in there. So I put like camera ABC in parentheses. It was an ABC setup, and so he knows what the cameras are, and he knows it's a group because of the way I named it. Now if something's like a visual effects plate, I'll mark plate, because your visual effects, if you have a visual effects editor, they'll look for those. And the editor also knows, oh, that's not a take, that's just a plate. If we're building temp visual effects, we'll use those plates. Any questions on the bin organization? These are conversations you will have to have with your editor, because there's no like one right answer. Yeah?
How long is your process for this? Is it like a half a day, a couple days, a day?
Depends how many hours of dailies you have and how complicated the takes are. I've had dailies that took me an hour and a half, 2 hours to prep the day's dailies, and I've had dailies that took me 8 hours. It just depends how much and how complicated they are. Because there was an instance where we had a director who just didn't like to cut ever. So we would have 10-minute takes with 6 full restarts in them. And guess who had to watch the whole take and find all the restarts across supposedly only 4 takes? And if I was subclipping out each restart so the editor knew, oh, this is actually how many options you have, that takes longer. So it just depends on how they shoot and how much footage you got. Action scenes take the longest because they have a lot of coverage. They'll have coverage of the actor doing like part of a stunt, and then they'll have the stunt double doing the stunt, which is the same coverage. And I usually try to, depending on the editor, I'll organize that so they understand. Like, might put like, here's the actor, here's the same part of the scene with the stunt double, and I'll let them know that's the stunt double, that's the actor, it's the same bit, because they'll name them different setups. And so if there's specific instances in that scene, I'll let them know that's what I was doing to try to make it easier on them. And editors might move things around on their own as well. I mean, I've had editors do that. Like once I've handed it to them, it was organized enough for them to say, okay, now I'm gonna move all this around. And I was like, all right, well, and that was just, part of their creative process, the way their brain needed to process the scene. They just need to move stuff around. Question, I saw a hand.
In terms of prepping bins for your editors, do your editors ever have preferences about bin view in terms of columns and the metadata that's visible within the bin?
Usually for the cut bins, they'll have that. All the editors I work with want it in frame view. And then they'll have their preferences for how they want that view set up. But as far as columns, that's usually wherever the cuts are. And we'll have set ones for like music. So because we might have descriptions of score. So that's usually what it is. Also, slow motion. If you have stuff shot in slow motion, and that's usually with action scenes. So I've had a couple random dialogue scenes shot in slow motion for some reason. I don't know why they did that, because we didn't use any of it. And it created triple the amount of work for me. So when that happens, especially if there is a sound associated with it, if your dailies facility are lovely human beings, they will give you 2 sets of clips. One at the slow-mo speed, and then one resped and synced to the audio. And then, so you have to, mark both of them, because even if it's a dialogue scene, maybe they want to use it. Maybe the director will come in and be like, no, I want all this slow-mo and sounding all weird, or whatever. You don't know. So it has to all be prepared, because the editor has to address the director's notes. And usually the producers are like, what, no. It's a dialogue scene, what are you doing? That has happened. So you never know if they're gonna need to refer to that slow-mo stuff. So even if you think it's ridiculous, you have to prep it. You have to make it easier for your editor. Yes?
I just want to mention that not every dailies house will automatically give that stuff to you.
I was about to mention that.
It can incur an additional cost, so it's something to talk to your post-producer about.
Yeah, on a show that I will not name, that had a lot of slow-mo, the dailies facility didn't do that. I don't know if it was a budget thing or why, they didn't pay for it to be done. So we would get the slow-mo scenes, and then we would get the sound rolls, and we would just have to manually sync all the dialogue. We'd have to re-speed it, and then sync up the sound roll, and then hit auto sync to create a clip out of it, and that sucks. Most times, fortunately, the dailies facility will do that for us, but on one particular show, they didn't, and there was a lot of stuff shot in slow-mo. We actually had an extra assistant editor. That was her whole job, re-speeding clips. So it was cool, because for the most part, I didn't have to do it. Sometimes she was so bogged down, I was like, fine, I'll do it. And I would do it. But we had an extra person to help for the most part on that, because it takes a lot of time. And especially if it's, sometimes, I don't know why, sometimes they forget to shoot the slate in frame. You don't see the clap. Even on these big productions, it happens, and you're just like, really? Like, was anyone paying attention to what the camera was looking at? That happens. More often than not, it is in frame, but it does happen, and those are really fun days when the editor comes in. They're like, "What's taking you so long?" And then you show them, they're like, "I'm just gonna leave you alone now. I'm not gonna bother you anymore." I'm like, "Yes, please just go away. I'll get to you when I can." They're like, "All right." So your editors can be sympathetic. They understand what you're going through. Trying to get the footage to them. Most times that doesn't happen, but there's a few times where it just took a long time. Okay, so an assistant's role is there any other questions? I guess I should mention, when we mark slow-mo, we'll put like the frame rate it was shot at. So it usually says on the slate what it's shot at, or you can check in your camera reports. Like, so we'll be like 1A-1, 120 FPS, or 48 FPS, or whatever it was shot at, and then we'll just name the clips that we resped to regular speed to sync up. Any other questions before I move on? Yeah?
Are you organizing the stuff in the bin in a certain way? Like the master
Depends on the
shot
editor.
or whatever, and then
Depends on the editor.
And
Some editors I'll do it scene order, and some. So I'll read the script and I was like, oh, this is an establishing shot that's marked F, but I'll put it at the top because that's obviously the establishing shot. And other times they'll just be like, no, just put it in alphabetical order and I'll move it around if I want. I'm like, all right. Yeah, Chris?
You ever got less than 24 frames on shot?
Let's not talk about that. Yes.
Are you triggered? Oh, sorry.
No, we've gotten all sorts of speeds, and then we've just brought it to, if it's an issue, you know, I'll bring it to the attention of the editor.
How about like 22? Have you ever got like 22?
I have gotten random frame rates. Occasionally we got some GoPro footage, which had weird things happening to it. Most of that is usually the Dailies facilities problem. So I love my Dailies facilities, unless they always sync stuff 1 or 2 frames out of sync, and then I hate them. Yeah.
Do you usually have V in front of your VFX shots, like on your scenes? Or
I
do you
won't
leave it
change
without
that. If it's something that the Dailies facility labeled with V, I'll leave it. But I won't mark that if it's not marked. If it's a plate, obviously. And it's the editor who will usually refer to it. Because the thing is, I don't want to be wrong. Because what if I misunderstood? So I'm not going to mark it V. If the Dailies facility marks it with a V for visual effects, cool, that's on them. I'll leave it. But I don't want to be wrong that that's a visual effects shot when it's not, because I misunderstood what I was reading. So I'll just leave it. Hurry. Yeah.
Would you be timing it if you have to sync it by hand? Are you like creating like another mix down of it? And if you do that, like how does it keep the relation to?
Don't you dare make a mix down of Dailies.
Yeah, I know, that's
Don't you dare. No, it's in Avid, people like doing motion effects or time warp. People usually just create a motion clip,
Yeah.
which is not a mix down because it's still, it's a render, but it still links up to the original clip and the original metadata. Yes. Don't you dare ever make a mix down in Dailies meeting. And I've seen people do that and it'd be like, what the hell are you doing? Because then that's going to make your life hell, because then you can't track it back, and when online gets it, they're going to be screaming at you.
So that'd be motion effect versus time warp, right? It's like
Yeah, most times they do them as motion effects,
okay.
and then you just auto sync it. Okay, so it's not all tech stuff, and it's not all Dailies organizational boringness. As an assistant editor, you will be asked to do sound design. Depending on the editor, you may or may not be asked to score. Do temp score. We use a lot of movie scores. You may or may not be asked to do recaps. It's not required. It's a tricky situation because it's kind of an unofficial norm that the assistants will do the recaps, but as per the Editors Guild, it's editors do the editing. So you'll have to kind of gauge the situation for yourself. I'll cut the recaps. I like doing them, so I don't mind. And the editor might ask you for feedback. No one else is going to ask you for feedback, most likely. And if they do, get out of giving any feedback as soon as you can. Because if your feedback goes against what your editor is arguing for, you're going to have a very uncomfortable conversation later. And depending on the relationship with your editor, you might be able to cut scenes. But if you are able to cut scenes, just always remember, even if you think you should be editing and you're the best out there and you've been already editing, you were hired to be an assistant editor. You do your assistant editor job first. And then if you want to cut scenes, great. But you need to do the job you were hired for first, before you take that step. All right, sound design. I have stuff. Okay, so on sound design, it changes by shows. And it's really important to help sell the cut. One of the things editors really worry about when they're hiring assistants is, can you do sound design? It's probably one of the big reasons they are afraid to hire people who have never worked in scripted before. Because if you're coming from something else where you don't have to do sound design, or the only sound design you did involves a lot of whooshes and swishes. Yes, I did a lot of whooshes and swishes. Then that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to quickly get the sound design done. They have to take the time to help train you and guide you and get to a point where they feel comfortable showing it to the directors. And that's up to the editor to make that decision. So people don't want to have to train people. Others are willing to give people a chance and willing to train them. Just depends. So for Minority Report, there was a lot of future tech. There were a lot of chases, a lot of running, people falling, flying into walls. There were fights, got to get the punches in. So the thing about the future tech, has anyone seen Minority Report, the TV show? Don't imagine many people did. It was canceled. Oh, making you fast. So they had these clear screens that were their computers. There was never actually anything on there. But every time the actors decided to do this and do their whole scene like this, guess who had to add a sound to every single little minute gesture because they were supposedly interfacing with the computer? That took a while, and sometimes the actors got a little overzealous. But it didn't matter. I just stuck it up, add little sounds, little computer to every single little gesture. Supergirl. It's very different. That was a following show. You're dealing with superhuman abilities and superhuman fights. So, the kind of punch I would do sound design for Minority Report, and Supergirl would do that punch, and then add a explosion sound underneath it. Because when she punches something, she's going to be hitting it hard. You know, we had to do sound for every time she took off and flew. That was like a jet flyby. There were all sorts of crazy sounds. You really had to, it was a lot of fun. You had to use your imagination a little bit. But everything had to be over the top, big, superhero, because she's a superhero. And then when I went to work on Preacher, it was all about subtlety and detail. It does have a vampire in it, but for the most part, the rest of it was grounded as far as sounds, not necessarily abilities. It was a little bit of a supernatural show. But, you know, Jesse the main character wasn't like super strong or anything. The vampire was strong, but he was usually just mostly drunk. But what they did in Preacher a lot is to do the sound design, I had to know the script. Because what they would shoot is be like, you know, a close-up shot on Jesse seeing something. And then in the script, they would be describing in detail what he was hearing. And I had to come up with that sound design. So I couldn't just, by watching the cut, be like, oh, nothing's happening. It's like, no, read the script. All the story is happening in the sound right now. And then that fell to me. And usually with those scenes, because it was very like creative approach, it could be sound one way or another, I'd have discussions with my editor and be like, so this is how I'm kind of seeing it. Is that how you're seeing it? And then we kind of talk back and forth about what we think it should be. And so then I'd come up with something and we'd work together because, you know, it was an integral part of the story. And so these are all scripted shows, but I had to approach a sound design very, very differently. So it all just depends on the show you're working on. Yeah?
I come from the agency side and we work with a lot of sound effects libraries. How does it work with, in this case, does an editor give you an approved sound design library, or are you going out on your own to find those kinds of resources?
I have about 2 terabytes of sound effects that I have accumulated. It's all temp stuff. It's not stuff that they can use. Once we give it to our sound department, they're going to replace everything.
Oh, got it.
But it's just friends. Sometimes some shows will have, the sound department will give you like Foley, and though you could integrate that into the cuts. I've cheated and used like the sound effects split track from old CTMs because it's like, oh, that's established sound for this drone landing, and they already did it. I'm just gonna steal that from the CTM and drop it right there, done. And you know, that kind of stuff usually takes multiple layers, but it's like, well, that's the final sound, so that's what I'm gonna use. And it makes it a lot easier. I've had people, they like using the sound design in trailers. You're able to get your hands on like split track trailers, because those have really cool sounds, and for something that's maybe a superhero show like Supergirl, like there's a lot of that stuff could be really useful. Probably not so much in Preacher. I would use sound from trailers.
But are those okay libraries to use? Because I work with those libraries usually, and I know they have
Libraries?
billions of those like catalogs available.
Well, I know a lot of people, I forgot what it is. There's websites where you can get free sounds from. I already have a giant library, so I'm pretty much covered. And you could usually just borrow from other assistants, or the show might already have a sound effects library imported, so you just search the bins. What I like to do is, because people separate sounds in all these categories, and I won't understand the rhyme or reason of any of their separation and organization. So I will literally open the media tool, find all the sound effects, and just copy them into like sound effects all 1 or 2, depending on how big it is, because if they're too big, the bins won't open. And then I just do a custom sift for my sound, because I was like, I'm not gonna waste 5 minutes trying to figure out how they categorize this gunshot or this body fall sound. I am just gonna, I have a bin, I type in body fall, and I'll have like 15 sound effects show up or whatever. That's how I like to work. I just like to custom sift, so I'm not wasting time trying to remember someone else's organization. So the elements in sound design, you're gonna have backgrounds and detail work, and every editor will have their preferences of how they like it to sound. I've worked with editors who don't like tinny sounds. They don't like anything that's high frequency, and they like really bassy things. I've had editors who are very particular about how their gunshots sound. It better be the right gun. I don't know anything about guns. So with those editors, sometimes I'd be like, what kind of gun am I supposed to look for this shot? And they'd be like, oh, this type of gun. I'd be like, cool, you just saved me 15 minutes. Just because I know they were so particular, and I was like, pfft. And they know I didn't know anything about guns. So I think they appreciated that I was going to be wasting my time, and then they'd hear it and be like, that sucks, don't use that one. So it just depends. And I mean, even music can be tricky. Some shows are dry. Colony was mostly dry show. The showrunners never wanted music during the dramatic dialogue scenes. Music was more like, if it's just like kind of action or movement, but if it's like a dramatic dialogue scene, they're like, no, just let the dialogue and performances like show the drama. Do not put music in there. So that like action scenes and anything, if someone was just walking from point A to point B, maybe like add tense music or something. And some shows like music wall to wall. So it just depends on the show. So if you're doing music, you best bet is talk with your editor if they want you to do music, see what their preferences are. And also watch previous episodes. If there's already a cut that's going out, watch how the previous editor laid in that music. Because all cuts need to like match tone and style. You can't just like be all out there. It's one show. It's not one show with everyone's styles embedded in. It's like, it's supposed to feel like one show. So, and if there's previous seasons, watch the previous seasons, just get an idea. You don't have to watch the whole season, just an episode or two, so you can get an idea and a feel for how they like their music. And if a show's already had multiple seasons, they'll already have the finished music from the composer imported into the Avid that you can use and reuse to score the episode with. I'm going to show you a cut, and I want you guys to participate. What should I be hearing? And this is there's MOS. This was shot MOS. I know stuff's offline, but ignore that. What should you be hearing? This is not supposed to be MOS. That's all I got, and that was cheated from a different take. I'll show you the take that was from. What should you be hearing in the backgrounds?
Engine sounds for the car.
Engine sounds with the car.
Desert environment.
Yeah, desert environment, wind, footsteps. She's like licking dirt, which is gross. You should hear that. Oh, look, there's a part coming up that, oh, she has some kind of weird powers. Maybe we should accent that. This is all stuff you gotta look out for. when you're building sound design. What should you be hearing? And I'm going to show you right now this sound I cheated. It's from this take. I was like, oh, it's the same actor. He's kind of doing the same thing. He's exhausted. I'm just going to cheat it. That works.
Yeah.
I do that all the time. And also, if your editor is cutting something and there's like gaps in dialogue because maybe there was a noise or you hear a crew in the background or the director saying, okay, now do this. Directors are usually the culprit of having to like pull out random bits of in between dialogue. You need to be able to go to another part of that scene to get the room tone and like put that in. Otherwise, you're going to hear that no sound. It's going to pop out. So you got to fill all that in, and your editor may not tell you to do that. It might be assumed that you're going to clean up that dialogue to make sure it sounds smooth before you start, and do that before you start the sound design. Yeah.
How detailed do you get? Like they're wearing chains and jewelry. Do you want to put in sounds for that? Even though it may not be
It
essential?
depends on your editor. I've worked with editors who want stuff very, very, very detailed, and then I've worked with editors who are like, no, that's fine. Production sounds fine. Good enough. So it just depends. So can you see kind of the name? Oh, maybe I can make that bigger. Names of some of these sound effects. Can you guys see those names? Kind of what they are.
Yes.
So. There's a hit in the music, which is why there's body falls. Notice there's different environments for between the two scenes. They're not in the same room. So it felt a lot more filled in. It helped sell the cut better. You don't want anything that's going to be distracting. It should feel naturally part of the scene. And you could see why I didn't add, there's nothing right there in that speed change, because when the music starts, it's in the music. And I mean, levels aren't great in here, but hear all those little details, and you're not distracted by it. You're sort of just watching the scene. So that's all stuff. I like to work in passes, so I'll lay in all my backgrounds first, because I'll have an act in front of me and say we're going back and forth in scenes, and there's an environment that's in someone's living room, then there's an environment that's outside. I'll just do copy and paste and find all the scenes with that living room and just go plop, 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 because I already found the room tone for that and the background for it. And I'll do the same thing with outside scenes, and sometimes I'll cheat and use the same bird sound for different outside scenes. Do whatever you can to try to get the work done. You don't have to reinvent the wheel with sound. Like, they just need it to get done and done well, but it doesn't have to, you're not the final sound designer. Someone else is getting paid a lot of money to do final sound. This is all for internal viewings. And just because it's only for internal viewings doesn't mean it can be crap. It needs to be done well. Some difficult sounds that I come across all the time. I mentioned gunshots. Anytime it's like it's just an abstract thing that's part of the script as something you have to build, that working with your editors is really good with that, so you could get an idea and kind of head towards the direction they were thinking as well. Crowds are very hard. I have never used like a single crowd to fill in a crowd. It's usually about 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 layers of different types of crowd to fill in those background sounds. Because if you only use one, like it just sounds like a sound effect, and you don't want it to distract you. So you mess with the levels, you layer them, you find what you need to know. Sometimes it's like you be surprised. You can type in crowd, type in like bar or restaurant, and you'll still get crowd sounds, but just depending on the extra sounds. Like restaurants, usually you'll hear the like tinkling of glasses. Bars, they'll usually be a little louder and more crowded and rowdy. And oh, another thing, screams, human sounds, grunts, those can sound really bad. So you have to work extra hard to find something that's not going to be distracting. And so help me God. You may think it's funny, but do not put a Willem scream in there. I know some people like to work it in, but it's distracting. You don't want to distract them. You're not helping your editor's cut at all. Don't use the Willem scream, even if you think it's hilarious. If you want to use it just to play a joke on your editor, fine. But make sure you have a better scream in there for when the other people actually see it. But yeah, screams are really hard because they usually, the ones you'll find in your soundlet library are like, ah! Or they're like completely over the top and you're like, what the? And sometimes we'll just record it into our phone and then put it in depending on what we need. We've done sound design where we just record into our phones. So just be aware if it sounds fake, I guarantee you your editor will notice and will tell you to fix it. So if it sounds fake to you, try to fix it before you get to them. So are there any other questions on sound design? Yeah.
Yeah, how long does it usually take for you to do all of this? Like, is it like a day task, or is it a couple hours? Or...
Day, you're funny. It depends on the show. Premieres and finales of action shows tend to be like the regular episodes times 4 sometimes. It's taken me a full week to do temp sound design because of everything involved before, and you just kind of squeeze in time when you can and get those action scenes done early, because your editor might have notes on those, especially, and it's taken me, so it ranges 2 to 5 days depending on the amount of detail, how much action scenes are involved. It's really easy when the only sound I have to add in a scene is a background and someone opening a door. I was like, well, that's done. But then other times, I have to sound design a sword fight, and you have to add all the sword sounds and all the body hits and all the craziness, and that'll take a lot longer. Yep.
When you begin sound design on a scene, where do you strike a balance between involving your editor and what they want versus being independent and just starting it on your own?
That depends on how comfortable you are with your skills and your relationship with your editor. So you just kind of have to judge for yourself. Like, the only time I'll consult with my editor is if I'm unclear about something, and so I just want to clarify so I don't waste anyone's time, including my own, because I have so much other stuff to do. Or if it's something that is like the stuff I had to do on Preacher, where the story is actually happening in the sound, and the editor already has an idea in their head of what they want to hear. So I'll have a conversation with them. It's like, okay, did you already have something in mind for this? This is something that's actually in the script. And they may or may not. Just depends.
So you typically talk to them before you begin?
No, I just ask them, can I do sound on this scene? And they'll be like, yeah, cool. And that's it. Does anyone have questions about music? Yeah?
I want music and sound. Like, I know it's gonna depend on the editor and the show, but how does it work? I mean, given that this isn't locked, they're going back and forth, they're gonna make a scene shorter. Is it like, okay, great, I screwed up all your sound design, go.
You go fix it.
Yeah.
That's what you do. You go fix it. You go clean up the sound. Yep.
I didn't, yeah.
That's what you have. Yeah, that's what you do. You just go fix it. And some editors, I've worked with editors, actually most of the editors I work with will clean up their own sound. There might be something where it's like a really complicated sound because it was an action scene. They're like, I tried my best to not mess up your sound, but you might want to just listen to it just in case. And there's usually like little things I'll have to clean up. Other editors might just completely dismantle your sound, just like with reckless abandon, and you just have to deal with it. It just depends on who the editor is.
you guys are doing
and
awesome.
and how much they like you. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned like temping and like screens and stuff. Are there ever situations where you have to like temp in a line that you know is gonna be needed
Yeah,
for like
temp ADR.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm often in many people's shows because a lot of times I might be the only woman in the office at the time. And I'll be like, all right, fine. Yeah, we do that all the time for each other because even producers might rewrite lines or add lines, and we'll temp it in for timing, and then you'll have an ADR list that you put together. So recaps. Pick your story beats. What do we want to remind people about? What is important for this episode? Watch the previous episodes from the season. Most likely, most of your story beats are going to be coming from the episode immediately prior. Sometimes it might be 2 or 3 episodes before. It just depends on what is going on in your episode. So as you're watching them, you'll pull your selects. I watch them from, I'll make a copy of whatever the latest cut of an episode is from someone else's project. Remember, make a copy. Do not ever lock another editor's bin or the cut bins, and do not ever work directly in their cuts. Just make a copy in your own bin. Because if you mess that up, well, you're just messing yourself up, but you're not affecting the other team. You do not want to be the person who makes that mistake. So when you're pulling selects, look for stuff, any and all audio and visual stuff that will support your beats. Because you're going to need the visual stuff for, as you see, I kind of use them as a transition when between moments to kind of smooth out the beats, and I used a little bit over the previously on, anything you need, pull it, everything. And then what you do is you start stringing out your beats, just loosely. You don't have to refine yet. Just string out like the lines you might want or the images you might want to see. It's essentially just worry about that radio cut, and then you'll figure out how to cover it later. And who cares how long it is? If it's hitting all your beats, just put it there. And from there, you can kind of start moving stuff around to kind of figure out, okay, what's a good flow for this beat? It needs to start here, and this is a good point to end. Usually the last moment of your recap will basically help lead into the very beginning of your episode. So you got to look at that order. And then from there, that's what you start cutting down, and you just start chopping stuff out. And, make those recaps nice and quick. Don't have any dead air in there. Like I said, people want them fast. And you just start cutting them down and smoothing them out, making sure the audio's smooth. And then once you get your radio cut there of what you want to hear, you could start cleaning up the cuts on top of if you need to put any footage to help support it, say if someone's like, oh, I fell down the stairs, and they're telling someone, well, then you could also use the image of them falling down the stairs over that bit, and it'll help, tell both in the picture and the sound what's going on, just to keep it moving. Does anyone else have a question about recaps? Nope. Not as scary? Help you try to approach them? They're actually not too bad.
How long are recaps usually for every episode?
30 to 60 seconds. Just depends. And some shows don't require them. I didn't have to cut any recaps for Alter Carbon because it was Netflix. Yeah?
Do you do any notes for the producer or studio when you go to those cuts, or can your editor normally take care of those?
I'll do the recap notes because usually my editors don't want to deal with it and they don't know the footage. I'm the one who put it together, so they'll pass the notes on to me. Yeah?
Do you ever cut teases next time on? They show on the end of the show?
That's cut by a different department. I've cut that when I was cut in a couple reality or documentary shows. I cut teases at the end of acts, but not in scripted. That's done by someone else. All right, visual effects. Now we're out of time, so I gotta go quickly through this. Let's see. How much visual effects work do you have? Anything above V1, by the way, those are visual effects. Depending on what show it is, that'll determine how much visual effects you have to deal with. On the big shows, they usually have a visual effects editorial department, or they'll at least have a visual effects editor. On Altered Carbon, we had an entire department because it was a big show. On Supergirl, there was an entire department just dedicated to visual effects, and then it's up to you to collaborate with them, Sometimes they'll have elements that you'll need, like if you want to temp something, maybe they'll have concept drawings, or they'll put together a 3D model for you of something that doesn't exist, and so the editor can put it into the cut. So you just, you work with them, you collaborate. Tracking, FileMaker is a popular software to make databases. On shows where there aren't a lot of shots, I've used an Excel spreadsheet. It was actually Google Sheets to track, and my post supervisor is the one who told me, he's like, use this Google Sheet, and so we could all have access to it. And since there weren't that many visual effects, it was fine. Most of the episodes only had like 30 effects or 40 effects, and then one of them had like 140, but that was a very special, unique situation on that episode. You'll typically use a combination of markers or locators and then subcaps to label the shots, and subcaps are it's just an effect in Avid that you put on a filler layer, and you just like name the shot, whatever shot number you assign to it. Oh, that's an example of, I actually didn't learn visual effects in scripted. I learned them working at E, creating crazy, the flashy stuff for E. That's one of my E timelines. That's how complicated I would get. So actually, that was a lot harder than the effects I do now. And Misha Tannenbaum, again, he did another webinar called The Modern Job of the Visual Effects Editor. If you're interested in visual effects work, I know some people are interested in visual effects editing as a career. And since there's so many shows that use visual effects now, it's a very viable career. He did a whole webinar that goes into detail of like labeling, using subcaps, and all of that for visual effects. Okay, I need to know, and please be honest with me, how many people here don't really understand how Avid effects work or how to do Avid effects? Okay, have you seen them at all? You know what a 3D picture-in-picture is, you know what resize, you know what an animat is, you just haven't worked with them much. So you might get something like this. Common effect. I might have to cheat a little bit because I don't have much time. You might be asked to put something in a phone, and there's two kind of plates you can get. Or phone, or monitor, or whatever. They might shoot a green screen, cool, whatever, or they might not. And they might shoot both, and then your editor decides to use whichever plate they want, depending on the composition of the plate. So you're going to have to put the monitors in both of these. So let's see how quickly I could do this. Green screen. You have this weird lady. And the editor might give it to you like this. They'll just like throw a 3D picture-in-picture effect on there and be like, put that in the phone. I'm like, all right. And because this is a green screen, what's the point of having the green screen if you have to make a matte? So I'm just going to go ahead and flop this because I'm going to key that out. And so I put the actual old lady on the bottom. Go ahead and go to Spectromat. I'm just going to type it in. Spectromat, dump it on there. Say, okay. I'm going to admit it, I don't know how to read a spectrograph. That's what this is. So I'm going to say, no, screw that. Put my alpha in the source monitor. I know how to read that. I'll do a droplet. And then I'm just going to start playing with this, try to get a good key. Doo-doo. And that's a crappy key. That's a good enough key. You want to just usually feather the mat a little bit. Okay, cool. Key's done. Great. Now I got to put the lady actually in the phone. So I gotta put this 3D picture-in-picture, but I gotta adjust it. And I've done this many times where I started adjusting it, then realized I'm like midway in the shot. I'm like, damn it! Start at the beginning of the shot. You're gonna track it and keyframe it. I'm just gonna rotate it a little bit. I'll blow it up. Doo-doo. I'll adjust it there so you can see the candle and the weird lady. All right, that's cool, but there's a problem. The phone moves. That is distracting. you don't want your visual effects to be so bad that they're distracting. Your editor might just say redo that, or like that's not acceptable. So what you want to do is you could keyframe it, but keyframing that because of the shaking of the hand will be hard. So you just do tracking. Now Avid has a tracker. Mocha is a better tracker, but I don't get provided Mocha, so I'm just going to use this. And I'm also going to add a second tracker because there might be a little bit of rotation in there. And for rotation tracking, you need 2 tracking points. So I'm just going to tell them, here, just track that corner too. And I'm going to do a fluid tracker, if I could do that right. And because this is actually the foreground, tell it, track foreground. If you were trying to track what's underneath it, you would say track background. Now it's thinking, it's tracking. This is when I usually start going on Twitter, waiting for the tracking points. You see your tracking points. Okay, cool. Ah, there we go. Pretty good track. If you want to be really fancy, I'll be like, use the rotation tracking. And if you open that, you'll see it's looking at point A and point B. You need 2 points for rotation tracking. It probably wouldn't have made a difference, but I'm just trying to prove a point. You can do that, because sometimes if it's if she did rotate it, rotation tracking would help a lot. Now, this is not done to me because that really sticks out like a sore thumb. It's like white, blown out. So I might just go inside the crazy old lady shot, and hold on, I normally do this in the color correction tool because I'm really comfortable with it, but you don't have to know the color correction tool. You could just use the color effect. And then I could manipulate it in here, but I want to see how it looks against this background so I can match it. So I'm just going to double click on it so I could get access to that color effect clip. I'm going to say, no, go to that. So now I could kind of just start manipulating it. It's too bright to me. I'm going to take the brightness down. Looks a little saturated. I'll bring the saturation down. There's a tint to this footage too, so I could mess with the hue. You can mess with it here, or you could mess with this color gain. Either one. And so that looks better. I mean, it's not going to look perfect. It's just a temp, but at least it's not as distracting. And if you really wanted to, and sometimes it's a requirement, notice that you can see the trackers popping through. So you could easily remove trackers with a paint tool. I'll just remove one for the sake of time, but there's 6 trackers in there. Where's paint? Paint effect. And notice I'm using these are all effects that come with Avid. You could do lots of great stuff with Boris or Sapphire, but you don't always have that available to you. I'm just gonna be like, make a circle. That's not the right color. I'm gonna change the color to that. And so now you got this green thing. Problem is, phone moves. So then you're gonna track that as well. Ah, damn it. You just select it. And I didn't mean to press the space bar. Tracking. I want a tracker. Tracker. Let's see how that works. So it's following the little tracking marker. Some shows won't care if you paint them out. Other shows want you to paint them out, even for the temp visual effects, because they're distracting. So, oh look, now it's part of my green screen, and you see that tracking marker is now gone. And you would do that for all of them. You'll have to individually track all of them. Just that's how the Avid effects work. For something like this, I'm going to go quickly through the already done build. Nope, wrong one. Phone build. Here's the difference. So you saw basic techniques. I use tracking, I use keying, you can also use keyframing. I manipulated her face. So with these kind, you're gonna have to track it, put it on top. And then I like cropping it just so I could get an idea of like, okay, what am I really gonna see in the screen? Otherwise it'll be too wide and then I don't know where the phone is. Let's see, I didn't use them. And then you're gonna create an animat. This is a relatively simple one. It's just a square. And then I changed, I added tracking to it. And even with the tracking, the mat changed a little bit. So I added a keyframe just where the tracking kind of failed. And I just moved the shape so it would follow properly. So it was a combination of tracking and using keyframing. And then this is what I like to do with these. This is a little trick. I could have done 100% opacity, but the benefit of using these kind of plates is you should be able to see all those scratches and the light. So I'll just take the opacity down and it blends in the scratches and the light because that's what you're going to see over the image anyway. So it's a slightly better effect. And I also, I add a little feathering to the mat. Here's the feathering. The feathering's right here. So, I mean, a lot of shows, even if it's not a visual effects show, you will have to do monitor replacements. You'll put stuff in phones. You'll put stuff in iPads. You'll put stuff in computer monitors. Put stuff in TVs. So this is an effect that carry across all types of shows. And it's pretty simple. Anyone have a question? Yeah?
I've been having issues with holograms.
Huh.
And I basically had to do like a really weird workaround, and I'm not sure if it's because of how Avid works or what, but
what's the issue?
it's like you have a green screen, so I do a spectrum mat on what's going to be the hologram, the person talking, and you have like the back plate. But then I need to be able to add effects onto what the spectrum mat is, and then also make it 3D. So I have to do like a spectrum mat like twice of the same image that's the hologram, change that spectrum mat to an alpha, drag a matte effect onto it, promote that to 3D, and then have them both work. But whenever I resize, sorry, it's really complicated, but it's stuff like this that just doesn't make sense. But when I resize, it also takes the background with it. So
Yes.
so I have to like
Add an
adjust the
animat on
layer.
top.
On top of the matte effect?
At the very top layer, add a map, and that'll cut out the layers. Oh, you're talking about under the hologram? There's a way to do it. You're doing the opacity too early.
Okay.
Do the opacity last. So, to make it look like a hologram, it has some transparency.
Yeah.
Do the transparency last. So in order to cut it out, if you're cutting it out, and say your animat is the last effect, do the opacity parameter on the animat, and that'll make it see-through, kind of like this. And that'll help control it. So do the opacity last, and then you won't see the background through your transparency. I'd have to see it to give you the best build for it, because it does sound like a complicated effect, but that's generally what you need to do. Okay, so for visual effects, you'll often have to do eyes. I'm gonna rush through this. So your editor might just give you a locator that says, eye power starts here. And you're like, okay. And this is actually kind of a complicated build. But let me open the So for this eye effect, and this works with like muzzle flashes are the most common one. Maybe if you bring, does everyone know what a matte key is? So if you have matte keys or elements you want to bring in, say you want to put a building in the background or whatever, this is how you can manipulate them. Hold on, missed you guys. So like this is my eye. Oh, that's the wrong one. I use this one. And look how big it is. That's how big it's going to be on the screens. So let me step in. And I hit the wrong button because I'm not used to working on the laptop. There we go. So here's the matte key. This is what, and I just resized it. Matte keys are great because they have their own parameters. You can promote it to 3D for more options. And I had to track it to follow her eye. I had to do a combination of tracking and keyframing because the track didn't hold. So if I delete that and delete that, you'll see it didn't quite follow the eye. You can see it's kind of peeking right there. So I just keyframe those little bits rather than like have to retrack the whole thing, because for the most part the track was good. Little thing about matte keys, you could go inside the matte key. You could see the matte is locked. I mean, just make that smaller. And you could manipulate it. You can manipulate the fill layer. But just be aware, if you do this, say it goes offline and you re-import it, you're gonna lose everything you did to manipulate the fill layer. Just know that. So you would have to redo it. But so I just took, this was just a color effect, and I just added some keyframes and like messed with the hue to make it look like it was going all crazy and changing. And then you'll see it in the matte. Now the problem here is you'll see it's not conforming to her lid. So I need to cut that lid out. And I did that with an animat. Where's that? Oh, it's acting weird. Why is my matte acting weird? Huh. Avid's being buggy, sorry. Yeah, go ahead and laugh, Matt. I know you want to. That Matt. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes when you track stuff, the tracking gets all wonky. But I basically cut it out to that eye, and then I just track the shape. Add a little feathering. So now it's cut out. And this is what I like to do when I have to duplicate effects. I literally just say Option C. I'll copy the effect into here. You can see the eye. And since I already built the eye, and then I'm just gonna, recut it. I don't want to overcut that one, but I would recut it into the sequence. It's because it's hold on, I don't have that to the right spot. Recut it in, and then I just go in and I'll redo the tracking, and then redo the shape for the other eye. So I don't need to like redo the resizing of the eye because it's the same size. So whatever workarounds you could find to do those cheats, do. Copy and paste builds. I do it all the time. Any questions about this? Yeah?
I worked on a project where they had the phone monitor, but sometimes they would get their fingers in or hands over it, or are there any tricks for that, or you just
For a
have
way,
to,
the fingers in the way?
Yeah.
Put another layer on top of your clip and just cut out that section that needs to be put. It's like pasting construction paper.
Uh-huh.
You're just putting it back on, and you just need to do it for that section that got blocked.
Okay.
Yeah, so you just have like a little mat for that. You don't have to make this whole big complicated thing. I mean, you can like do a big complicated mat to try to keep it in, or you could just put the part that got blocked in that one little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier. And split screen. Okay, sometimes, actually a lot of times what you'll see is editors will do split screen takes. So the original shot, the woman is just kind of standing back there picking her nose, fixing her hair, and not doing anything, and say the editor's like, no, she needs to be walking forward. So this is from a different part of the take where she actually starts walking forward, but now it's out of alignment with the shot composition, but they want to use that part of it. So you got to make it work as one shot. And would you believe that was, it's possible to do. It's actually not bad. So what I did is, and I left these resized for a reason, I would kind of line her up where I need her to be. Let's see. So what I was trying to match was the horizon right here, because that's very distracting when that doesn't line up. It's the sky, it should line up, it's not puzzle, or it's like a puzzle, it should line up. So I moved her and resized her to where I needed her to be, so that horizon would line up. And another thing you have to do, let's see. So when you have two shots that are kind of moving and shaky, it's good to try to put a stabilizer on one to make it kind of as still as possible. And then on that same shot, what you're gonna do is you're gonna track it to the other side. So it could kind of try to match the camera movement of the other side. So that's what this 3D warp has. Yep, it has position tracking. Let me open the tracker. You'll see I tracked, I think I just tracked something that didn't really move, I think it was the bush. So it could match the camera movement. And this won't always work perfectly depending on how bad the camera is shaking, but it usually gets it to a good enough point where you kind of prove, yes, it's possible, you know, we just need to send it to a visual effects vendor and have them actually do the final. Well, notice there's a problem. Even if you ignore the bars, these shots don't line up. We need to fill the screen. Really easy way to do that, once you have it is on a, you could put it on a full layer, you could put it on top of your second top clip. You know, you just blow up the shot a little bit. Not so much to the point where it looks terrible and it's just too much because it's going to be bad. It just doesn't have the resolution for it. But just enough to try to get the shots lined up. So I was trying to get rid of this bit because I had to move her. And what I like doing, sometimes people will just use the 3D warp like feathering on the border and crop. I actually like using animats because you could kind of shape it to where you need it to be and feather it nicely. Because I had to take into account her hair and make sure that she, from the other shot, she didn't get in the way or her hand didn't reach out in here. Sometimes you might have to kind of adjust for a random finger flying in from the other side that you're not supposed to see. And I actually also have an animat on this side, and the reason why I have it is, you see the wind blowing on her? Can you see it? There's wind blowing, and you could kind of see it's not blowing in the other side. So that's a little distracting. And so I just added another animat here to, so I could cut out this side so the wind would kind of go across the screen, and essentially she ends up getting cut out because of how I have it set up and built. And then you could see the wind blowing across both sides of the screen, and it looks more believable and not distracting. And now you have a shot you created that doesn't really exist. I've been asked to do really, really complicated builds. I once had to do a head replacement. I had about 3 or 4 frames to work with on a shot that needed to last 2 seconds. And I used a combination of all of these techniques to make that shot work. Like, these are all the basic techniques you would need, pretty much, and just using them in different combinations and like layering and embedding, you could get some pretty complicated shots done with these basic techniques. Basically, compositing, tracking, keyframing, and keying. Those are the biggest techniques to practice. Yeah?
Was the final shot as pushed in, or when it went to be?
Oh, this is edit stock footage?
Oh, okay.
Yes,
So it's not
but the
like
final
you-
shot would have had to be as pushed in unless the visual effects vendor decided, I mean, I guess I technically could have painted in the sky, but it was so much easier just to do a resize, and if the editor was cool with the composition, then I'm just gonna leave the resize than trying to paint in ground and sky. That's more complicated.
Okay. Those decisions, like, it wouldn't be like, oh, then the VFX editor would do it.
I mean, a lot of shows will have the visual effects editors do the temp visual effects. I really like doing temp visual effects, so I do as many as I can. And not every assistant working can actually knows how to do these kind of effects. So it's to your advantage to be able to do them. It makes you more hireable. And especially if you want to work on visual effects shows, even if you're not gonna be the one responsible for it, they wanna know that you could like handle basic visual effects temping. Cause you never know, the visual effects editor might get bogged down with tracking and rescreenings. And I mean, that's what happened on some of the shows I worked on where we had whole departments, but they were bogged down with all these other things and we had to get a cutout, so I just did the temps. Even though they said they would try to do them, but they just couldn't get to it. Yep.
So as an assistant editor, would you be doing most of your visual effects work inside Avid? Like you wouldn't jump over to After Effects or anything like that?
That's actually a personal choice. A lot of assistants like to go to After Effects. I don't, because I want to keep it in Avid as much as possible to retain the metadata. Sometimes they'll be like, oh, what plate did you use? And so they'll use the parts of the plates that I actually used, because the visual effects temp was like good enough to see, yeah, that'll work. We'll just, make it look prettier. And it's like, okay, cool. And so a lot of people do like going to After Effects. Some of the more complicated things that can't be done in Avid, if we don't have a visual effects editor to do it in After Effects, we'll just slug it as like with a descriptor of this is what you're seeing. Because me trying to do something that's gonna look really bad in Avid will be more distracting than if they could having them imagine it. So it just depends on the resources they have on the show. I like doing it in Avid as well because I tend to work with editors who, not every editor is kind of effects savvy, but I tend to work with editors who are effects savvy because they're working on all these big shows, and big visual effects shows. And so they like, if they want to manipulate my build, it's right there. They can do it. Sometimes if it takes more time than they have time for, they'll just leave it broken and be like, Monica, can you fix this thing I broke? And it's my build, it's right there, and that way they could always, the daily's always there for them to manipulate. But it just, every show works differently. Some people like to just make mix downs of the temp visual effects. I personally don't, in case we need to do a quick manipulation. Then we have to like track down where we did the build and then retime it for what the new cut is. And but like I said, it's all preferences. This is my preference. I like just leaving them in the cut. And if they're too tall, then I'll just nest them down and render them. But it's all still there for the editor to manipulate if they want to. Outputs, turnovers, and VAMs. I've already really gone over those a lot. I'm assuming, I'm going to assume you all know generally how to do outputs. It's a big part of the job. Make sure you have your proper watermarks. Those are questions you need to ask. Don't assume what the watermarks are. Ask. If someone's already done outputs, you could just ask the assistant who did it first. If you're the first assistant and you haven't done it yet, then ask your producer, associate producer, or coordinator. I usually go to the coordinator first, and then it might go up the chain depending on who knows, or they might find out for you. But it's for security reasons. There's studio protocols, so don't assume anything about the watermarks. Ask, and they will tell you what you need as a watermark. Paperwork. There's 3 sets of paperwork. You have your dailies paperwork, cuts paperwork, and delivery paperwork. We kind of already went over our dailies paperwork. Are going to be camera reports, sound reports, all these fun things. Cuts paperwork, your continuity will be part of that. As you need inserts of the editor's like, I need an insert of someone's hand doing this random thing. Then you'll make an inserts list because it needs to go up the chain and go to production, and they have to budget for that and get a crew to shoot those shots. An owed list, if they owe you stuff, they didn't shoot it on the day and they were supposed to, keep track of all that because they might forget or, it just falls through the cracks, so keep track of all that. For all the temp ADR you do, if the lines are changed or say there's like a announcement over a PA speaker that they didn't record anything for and you just end up recording it, put that on the list because they need that to schedule ADR sessions. You'll have a music list. The music list will be for commercial music, like the latest, if you use like a Blink 182 song or something. Anytime you use that kind of stuff, they need to get clearance for that. Give a heads up to the music supervisor of what you used because they have to go through all the labels and the artists and get permission to get music and get prices. Because music, some songs can be $500, $5,000, $50,000 to use. It all depends. And if you are doing visual effects editing, you will need to make visual effects lists. A lot of times those are generated by FileMaker, or Excel sheets, which is what I used on Preacher. That's all gonna be part of your cuts. And then your delivery paperwork, this stuff's all really easy. Any stock footage you used of establishing shots of like a city, and it's usually aerial stuff of a city. They need to know, because they have to pay for that from Getty, get the master, and get all the licensing rights. Music list will be part of your delivery paperwork. Actor deletion, if you cut a scene or cut an actor out that was supposed to be in the episode, they need to know. It has to do with their residuals, how much they're paid. It's very, very important. You know, they have to deal with SAG with this. If any actor that's in the recap, or if there's some kind of weird flashback where you pulled something from another episode, you need to mark that, because they need to know the episode number. Those are directed by different people, and that has to do with how much they're getting paid if you're reusing stuff that they worked on. As far as actors, I've done recaps where we're in season 3, we used an actor from season 1, no longer in the episode, but we needed to use them in our recap. That actor is gonna get paid for being in the recap. So it's very important to list all of that stuff. And if they appear in the episode already, if they're already in the episode, then I don't think they have to pay them more, but it all has to do with how much people get paid in the residuals. And clip summaries, that depends. Maybe if you're trying to license a movie clip or something. Every show, we'll call them different things, or every studio has different deliverable paperwork requirements. Does your brain hurt yet? Yes, a little bit. Okay, well, it's hard to go over everything. I've barely scratched the surface in the amount of time we have. Everything I showed you as far as how the episodes go, so that's like one episode. So as you're halfway through that process, you're gonna start getting dailies for the next episodes. And I think I've had, the most might have been 3 or 4 episodes active, because we couldn't get the shows locked at once when we were up against the delivery dates, and they're all gonna be in different stages, and you just have to keep track of all that and organize it. And I see poor Chris shaking his head. So you just have to keep track of that. Focus on your detail, always check your work. Sometimes I quadruple check my work, especially when I'm dealing with fine details and something that's like repetitive, because that's when your brain starts to turn off and you can make mistakes. Like when I'm doing my dailies, sometimes I'll do the little steps in a slightly different order, because it keeps me on my toes. Because if I always do it in the same order, my brain automatically goes on automatic, and that's when I'm gonna make a mistake and miss something. Because I'm not even, it's like when you're driving and you're like, how did I don't even remember passing that sign. The same thing can happen while you're working, when you have so much going on. So I do have all these little tricks in place for myself to check myself and to minimize possibility for mistakes that I have. And that's something you guys just need to figure out for yourself. Everyone has their own tricks.